have to start the, when you say the preamble stuff, you mean like the reason for the pledge of
No, I'm
allegiance?
going to say something before I call the meeting to order.
Okay. No, it's too late now. You're
I'm
probably
already-
going down to 20 seconds
It's
left.
down, it's down to the last 5 seconds.
Yeah.
It's there. All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Before I call the meeting to order, I see a lot of new faces, so I just wanted to go over how the meeting is going to function tonight. We have a little bit of business items at the beginning. I'm going to call the meeting to order. I assume most of the folks here are here regarding the noise ordinance. We're going to do a presentation for Lieutenant Stevens here. Once we do that, we are going to open a public hearing. Public hearing is going to be an opportunity for all the residents who want to make comment on the noise ordinance. You'll get 3 minutes at the podium. You can say anything regarding the noise ordinance you wish us to know. I just want to explain to anybody who hasn't spoken at a public meeting before that public comment in a public hearing is a one-way conversation, meaning it's not an invitation for dialogue. The board members, staff will hear your comments. Anyone who chooses to address them later in the meeting can do so. So, with that, good evening, everybody. Today is Wednesday, May 22nd. Time is 6:30 p.m., and I am calling this meeting of the Macomb Township Board of Trustees to order. We will now say the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk Posey, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Supervisor. Trustee Kuzmano?
Here.
Trustee Lucido?
Here.
Trustee Oliver?
Here.
Trustee Nevers? Present. Treasurer Drollet?
Here.
Clerk Posey? Here. Supervisor Viviano?
Here.
All members are present.
Thank you. Moving on to approval of the agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or corrections?
Mr. Supervisor, there's a proposed add-on for 9A, which is the public hearing you just discussed. The public hearing on amendments to the nuisance ordinance, Chapter 11, Article 3, to address noise. Other than that, I have nothing.
Mr. Chair, motion to approve the agenda with the addition?
Trustee Kuzma supports the motion.
Any questions or discussion on the motion? Hearing none, motion by Treasurer Gillette, supported by Trustee Kuzmano, to approve the agenda as amended. Members, please vote. Not a good start, Roger.
I got mine in.
Did you get it?
Yeah.
No, I voted. Is there somebody not voted?
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Roger, you just want to voice vote the rest of the meeting? Okay. Moving on to approval of the bills. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve?
Support.
Any questions or discussions on the bill run? Hearing none, motion by Treasurer Gillette, supported by Trustee Nevers, to approve the bills. Members, please vote. Just giving it a second.
Passed unanimously.
Motion passes unanimously. I'm just going to voice vote. All right, Roger. Moving on to approval of the previous meeting's minutes from May 8th, 2024. Is there a motion to approve?
So move?
Support.
Any questions or discussion? Motion by Treasurer Gillette, supported by Trustee Lucido, to approve the previous meeting's minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. This will take us to our first public comment of the evening. This is for agenda items only. Anyone wish to make public comment may approach the microphone on the right-hand side of the room.
Sure, this public comment is separate from the public hearing, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. John Parkinson, the address is on file with the clerk. I'm just curious, as you guys approved an add-on to the public hearing, can you guys read the amended item that you added, please? Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hello, my name is Diana Hart, and I live at 53100 Gregory Drive. Unfortunately, my educational background is not in history, but as I have been recently exposed to lectures from various historians and speakers on the subject, I keep hearing words such as consent of the people, or government of the people, by the people, for the people. And it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. I'm grateful that I live in a country where I have the right to petition, where I have the right to speak up and oppose government actions or policies that I believe threaten our peaceful homes and lives in Macomb Township. From what I'm learning from these historians, as well as many others, I have come to understand that your responsibility as a board is to your constituents in Macomb Township. With that being said, I have been following this attempt by the board to amend the noise ordinance from the very first draft. Wording, and more so deletion of wording, has spoken volumes to me. I've done my best to try to wake this community up to the realization that this is not just some coincidental change. That this proposed amendment being voted on today is calculated and deliberate. In the past, some of these board members have expressed their commitment to not approving an all-exclusive community. Today's your test. Today you will show by your vote where you truly stand. The argument that we don't want a lawsuit only goes to show me that our board is not willing to fight for us, the current residents. That it wants to rely on the ever so popular excuse of, it is out of our hands, there's nothing we can legally do about it, or any other convenient reason to not wanting to be held responsible and accountable for their decisions. That you are victims. Besides all those standing here in agreement that we do not want outdoor speakers to be allowed, there are many others in neighboring communities that have spoken up. I have here the names of those who have signed an online petition asking the board to standardize Macomb Township's noise control ordinance with neighboring areas. The majority of the names are from Macomb Township residents. I've intentionally included the names of those from our neighboring communities who feel that this decision you are making will affect them as well. Everyone's residence is clearly indicated so that you can know who does and who does not reside in Macomb Township. Obviously, the proposed distance and sound level decibels is unacceptable. The only fair and equitable solution for everyone is to not allow outdoor speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment?
Good evening. Tony Del Villano, 22619 Timbercrest. Not so much a comment, but when we do get to the discussion on the noise ordinance, just so it doesn't get lost, I'm not going to pretend to understand all the decibel levels and all that stuff. But two questions I do have that will hopefully be addressed later is, a place of worship, which of those zones does it fall under? The residential zone, non-residential uses in residential districts, or the commercial business office? So that's just one question for later. And the other one is, can't have speakers, whatever, blah, blah. What if I want to have a backyard party and I want to have a DJ there, and it's in the daytime maybe? Can I do that without having to come in front of anybody to say, hey, I need a permit for 4 hours on a Sunday afternoon? Am I being restricted because of a noise ordinance? So just looking for clarification.
Thank you. And anyone else? All right, we're going to move on to the consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move the consent agenda in its entirety, please.
Support.
Any questions or discussion on any of the consent items? Hearing none, motion by Treasurer Gillette, supported by Trustee Lucido, to approve the consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. All right, this will take us to our presentation. Tonight, we have the honor of recognizing Lieutenant Melissa Stevens, who has been our command officer these last number of years and who has chosen, unfortunately for us, to retire. So, Commander Abro.
Well, Mr. Supervisor, Township Board, thanks for having me to say a few words about Lieutenant Stevens, who I have worked alongside with and we're colleagues for a long time. Today's bittersweet for us here. Lieutenant Stevens has decided to retire from the Sheriff's Office. On a funny note, actually, I thought about how do we keep her? I said, you know what, maybe I'll go to her office and duct tape her to her chair so we can keep her there. And then HR said, Commander, you can't do that. It's not easy to say goodbye to Lieutenant Stevens. She has relentlessly worked for the Sheriff's Office for over 25 years and served in multiple capacities. Whether working road patrol, a young detective working homicide investigations, running an undercover unit by herself, working as Macomb Township Lieutenant, Lieutenant Stevens gave her all. Lieutenant Stevens for over 25 years has served the Macomb County Sheriff's Office, Macomb County, in particular the Township of Macomb, and its residents with honor, dedication, and pride. It's been a great privilege to work alongside you and to call you a partner. You've been an important part of the team and we'll miss you. On behalf of Sheriff Wickersham, the organization, I would like to express our gratitude towards your sharing 25 years of service with us. Last but not least, warm wishes for the next phase of your life and career, and we will cheer you on every step of the way. If we can all give Lieutenant Melissa Stevens a round of applause.
Thank you, everybody. Probably weren't expecting this today, but I just wanted to say it has been an honor serving the township. I started out as a baby out here. My first alone patrol car day was here in Macomb Township as a deputy, and I worked as a deputy for about 4 years out here on afternoon shift, and then I come full circle, and I'm retiring as the lieutenant. And I'm very happy that I got to start and end my career out here in the township. You guys have been a pleasure to work with. I think we've built some very, very solid relationships, and I'm happy to say that. So that's it. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So before Clerk Posey reads our resolution, I just want to say on a personal level, it has been an absolute pleasure working with you as well. And I think the biggest compliment I can give you is not only did every interaction with you exceed every level of professionalism, but you took your responsibilities here personally. And as a resident, and on behalf of all the residents, I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Clerk Posey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll read a resolution honoring Lieutenant Melissa Stevens upon her retirement. At a regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Township of Macomb, County of Macomb, State of Michigan, held in the Township Hall in said township on the 22nd day of May, 2024, at 6:30 p.m., the following preamble and resolution were offered. Whereas the Macomb Township Board of Trustees commends Lieutenant Melissa Stevens for her more than 26 years of dedicated service to the residents of Macomb County. Whereas Lieutenant Melissa Stevens began her career with the Macomb County Sheriff's Office as a corrections deputy in 1998. She was promoted to deputy sheriff in 2003 and then assigned to the road patrol in Macomb Township until 2007. Whereas Lieutenant Melissa Stevens continued her career path as a detective, detective sergeant, supervisor of Major Crimes Unit, which resolved many high-profile violent crimes and earned the promotion of lieutenant in 2018. Whereas upon her retirement, Lieutenant Melissa Stevens was the supervisor of the Macomb Township substation, where she carefully protected the residents of Macomb Township for nearly 4 years at this post. Lieutenant Stevens expertly handled emergencies and served the residents of Macomb Township with dedication, compassion, courage, and integrity. Now therefore be it resolved by the Board of Trustees of the Township of Macomb, County of Macomb, State of Michigan, speaking on behalf of all Macomb Township citizens as follows. that by these presents, the Macomb Township Board of Trustees recognizes the dedication, commitment, and personal sacrifices Lieutenant Melissa Stevens has made during her career serving and protecting the citizens of Macomb. And be it further resolved that the Macomb Township Board of Trustees hereby commends and publicly extends its congratulations to Lieutenant Melissa Stevens on her retirement and further extends its best wishes to Lieutenant Melissa Stevens in her future endeavors. Now therefore, the Macomb Township Board of Trustees hereby proclaims Wednesday, May 22nd, 2024, Lieutenant Melissa Stevens Day in Macomb Township. Congratulations.
Is there a motion to approve the resolution?
So move, Mr. Chair.
Support.
Clerk Posey, will you call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Supervisor. Treasurer Drollet?
Yes.
Trustee Nevers?
Yes.
Trustee Kuzimano?
Yes.
Trustee Lucido?
Yes.
Trustee Oliver?
Yes.
Clerk Posey, yes. Supervisor Vivian?
Yes, that resolution is adopted. We got a little something for you. Jason's gonna come and take a photo.
Such an honor, you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commander. All right, moving on to item number 9. This is the public hearing. Now, before I officially open the public hearing, we're going to have a presentation from Mr. Dick Carlisle of Carlisle Wortman, along with township staff, and they are going to give us some background on how this proposed ordinance was created. Mr. Carlisle.
I want to say good evening to board members and members of the public. Pleased to be here. We've been working with the township for several years now on a whole variety of subjects, and we've enjoyed our work with the township. It's a dynamic community, and obviously the issue of the noise ordinance further demonstrates how dynamic the community is and some of the issues that you're trying to address. If you could go on. Just for the, and this is, the board members, I think, know this, most board members do, if at least you hired us. So we've been in business for over 36 years as planning and municipal consultants. Our business is exclusively Michigan and primarily southeastern Michigan. So we have pretty intimate background with some of the struggles and the issues that our communities in this particular part of Michigan experience. We've been through every recession with all of you, being in a small business. We've been through COVID. We've been through all of the struggles, but we remained in Michigan and have continued to grow our client base to the point where we now serve over 80 communities in both planning and zoning, code enforcement, and municipal management. We have approximately 50 employees at this point in time. We started working with you in 2000. Excuse me, I wish it was 2000. 20, I would have been a lot younger back then. 2020. But we've actually, we've worked through with communities writing thousands of ordinances, which also include noise regulations. Please go on. Personally, I was the founder of Carlisle Wortman, nearly 50 years of professional planning experience. I'm a fellow in our American Institute of Certified Planners. One of the things that I have done a lot of is be an expert witness in zoning cases. And so I have a acute sense of what we need to do to help your attorneys defend ordinances. And I've also personally prepared dozens of noise ordinance provisions. And just as an example, I've worked in Independence Township for 40 years, dealing with noise issues at Pine Knob, which many of you have probably attended. The Waterford Racetrack, and more recently, we've done work with the city of Ann Arbor because of downtown noise issues. Not because the noise wasn't already there, it's because all the new housing in downtown Ann Arbor has moved in on the noise of the entertainment businesses that were already in Ann Arbor. So noise issues are unique from that standpoint. Sometimes they are present for a while and new activities moving around them, or sometimes they are created as a new activity when there are other land uses and residences, for example, present. So, Josh, Planning Director, Box, asked me to review the current noise regulations, and I felt that there were some gaps in how the approach was. It was not as comprehensive as we felt was necessary, and after providing some of my initial thoughts, we were asked to work with a team, but to develop a draft of new noise regulations. So why, when I approach any type of assignment like this, it's always tempting to try to pull another ordinance off the shelf. That is often suggested to us and say, well, obviously you've done something for somebody else. The problem is that it may not be the best thing to do. So we always exercise caution when we are doing ordinance work and attempt to address a couple of issues. Why shouldn't we just pull an ordinance from someplace else? Well, first of all, it may not address the relevant issues. Your community is quite different than Independence Township. Vastly different than from where I've been in Ann Arbor. Different than a lot of different places. And so we wanted to try to address, the issues that I believe are relevant to you. Certainly there are some universal issues, but we try to customize it to the things that are most pertinent to you. The other thing that I have found is that other ordinances may not be up to date in terms of a technical approach. I mean, the mere fact that somebody has a noise ordinance, look at the date at when it was done. It may not be the most up-to-date. So the recommended approach is to conduct research from a variety of sources, which is what we did. I'm not going to read through this list. It's available if anybody wants to see it, but we looked at both federal and national resources. We looked at state resources, and we also looked at a variety of local ordinances. These are just a few. There are some of the citations some of the sources that I cited on the first page have reference to a variety of ordinances, hundreds of noise ordinances across the country. And so, I did a search of those to try to find those that I thought might be more relevant to a community such as yours. But we certainly did research a variety of other sources. So, what should a noise ordinance be composed of? It has to have a clearly defined purpose related to legitimate governmental authority. And I think, as your township attorney will tell you, those are generally related to the protection of public health, safety, and welfare. So in other words, you've got to have a legitimate reason why you are regulating noise, just like you're regulating anything else, like your zoning ordinance. You have to have a legitimate reason, advance a legitimate governmental purpose to be involved in that regulation, and the legitimate governmental purpose is typically defined as the protection of public health, safety, and welfare. You must have measurable standards, and you must have clear enforcement procedures. So it's really of little value to pass any kind of ordinance unless you're able to have the standards that are recognized as recognized standards, and that you have enforcement procedures where you can actually enforce the ordinance. This is not a very good slide. I agree. This is about knowing your room, and the room is rather large. But one of the things I wanted to do is give a perspective of really how loud is really loud, because, and these are all, typical noise standards in terms of decibels that are measured for various types of activity. So the sound of a jet engine at 25 meters is 140 dB. That's really loud, okay? You would not want to stand, that's why when you're sitting in the plane and you see the people loading your baggage or guiding the plane, they've got earphones on, because that's ear-damaging type of noise. A rock concert, Pine Knob, for example, could be 120 up to 120 decibels at close to the source. A jackhammer, 100 decibels. Chainsaw, which many of us have used, 90 decibels. As you go on down, it becomes less. A vacuum cleaner in your home is about 70 decibels. Conversational speech is about 60 decibels. So my voice is being amplified now, but my conversational speech is going to be roughly about between 60 and 70 decibels. So if you notice, most of the noise regulations that you see in terms of the decibels that are permitted to be heard at a property line are very close to the noise of conversational speech. So that is generally the type of standard that you try to enforce. So when we say 65 dB at the property line, that's somewhere close to conversational speech, maybe a little bit louder, but generally that's what is considered. And so that is really gives you a perspective of the various ranges of noise, and all the rest of these, get much quieter after that. It's also a function of distance. So the greater the distance, the more that sound is reduced. So at its source, it may be 100 decibels, but 100 feet away, or let's say 200 feet away, it may be, 75 or 50. It's a function of distance. So, noise reduces over distance. And that's why when we write an ordinance, we write it so that receiving property, that property is hearing the noise, it's based on what you hear at the property line from the source. So the source is generating the noise, which when you're standing right next to it, maybe 60 or 75 or 80 decibels, but at the nearest source of the nearest receiving property line, it may have been reduced to 65. So that's the principle behind how you do noise regulations, because sound reduces over distance. So how did we write this ordinance? Well, one of the things we did is and by the way, there was a lot of collaboration, Township Attorney's Office, Township staff, there was quite a bit of input into this from the electeds also to provide us with feedback in terms of what made sense and what didn't make sense. So this really wasn't just a lone wolf type of, and we never do that. I mean, we never write ordinances that says, here, this is what you've got to pass. It's always a collaborative effort. But it's very important that you clearly define what it is you're attempting to do, and that's in the purpose and findings. So it's clearly tied to protection of public health, safety, and welfare. We know that the unregulated protection or unregulated a control of noise can be harmful to health. Been, a variety of studies indicating how harmful it can be for health, and that's why we try to control noise. It can obviously interfere with your enjoyment of your life and of your property, and certainly with your privacy. We also know that the use of sound amplification can make it worse if it's not properly controlled. And it also recognizes that there are going to be outside requirements or influences placed upon the township that may require the easing of or exemption of from noise regulation. And these may be state or federal regulations, it may be case law, it may be a whole variety of things that are constantly changing, by the way. So again, as I talk about being in a dynamic environment, I'm talking about the fact that laws that you don't pass, that are passed at higher authority, in case law, these things all affect ultimately how you have to consider your various ordinances. So the proposed noise ordinance is going to be applicable to all sources of sound sent to or received by various categories of land use. And those land use categories are generalized in the ordinance. Generally, the highest protection is afforded towards residential properties. It regulates the level of noise generated by a particular activity and is tied to the time of that noise. Because we know that in the evening hours, you have less ambient noise in general that masks the sound from a particular source. So at nighttime, it's going to be more disturbing. The same noise that might be generated in the daytime, at nighttime may sound even louder because there's no background or what we call ambient noise that is masking that sound. In other words, that din of traffic, for example, that you might hear, might not be as heavy at later at night. And obviously, later at night is when people and their children are trying to sleep. And noise that is generated is measuring at the receiving property line, that it's either at the property line or the one in closest proximity to the source of the noise. So this takes into account circumstances where the property that is generating the noise may be across a roadway from the nearest property line. So it doesn't necessarily have to be abutting. So the ordinance gives you ability to measure that noise and make a determination if that noise is exceeding the standards in your ordinance. So we use nationally recognized measurement standards. They were done by the American National Standards Institute. Decibel measures are based on what's called an A-weighted scale, and that predominantly means that sound travels in various frequencies. And so what the ANSI does is provide an A-weighted decibel scale that recognizes the frequencies of the sound as it travels over a various distance. And this is perhaps the scale that from most sources is recommended in terms of regulating noise. And it also recognizes that there are circumstances where background noise may actually exceed the noise being created by a specific activity. So that has to be taken into account when you're trying to enforce this ordinance, because what is perceived as the offending source of noise, if that noise went away, the background noise might still be present. And that's what you have to recognize when you're trying to enforce an ordinance such as this. So what are these noise levels? Again, these are categorized by various land use activities and are gauged to time. And I think what I'll try to do here is probably express the one that is most significant to people, and that's where it's a residential zone or non-residential use in residential zones, that from the period of 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., the maximum level, decibel level that is permissible at the property line would be 60, which is conversational speech. From 7 to 9, that has to drop to 55, and then from 9 to 7 a.m. down to 45. And it goes on from there. But generally, that portion is, I would say that that's the most restrictive portion of the ordinance in order to provide the greatest level of protection to residential areas from noise being generated from other sources. There are exemptions. We know there's going to be emergency work, from storms and generators that have to run and power equipment, to clean up. There's going to be warning devices. There's going to be outdoor school and park activities. We know that from time to time that's going to generate noise. There'll be exemptions for special events that are only approved by the township. And then, of course, public works projects, the normal public works projects. And then there's going to be more restricted uses and activity. There's more specific restrictions on certain common activities. I know this was a concern related to home maintenance and improvement and construction activity. We wanted to make sure that obviously people could still have that kind of thing done, but to try to control it in a reasonable manner so it's not disturbing to neighbors. It requires places of assembly to comply with requirements of the district in which it's located, unless, and this is what I mentioned before, otherwise required by applicable state or federal law. So there might be circumstances where we are preempted by state or federal law, and we might need to provide some kind of relief in that particular regard. And finally, as with most ordinances, this is general ordinance, and we are writing in provisions in this ordinance that give the board the ability to grant deviations based on undue hardship or practical difficulties. And there's standards laid out in the ordinance what that means. Or if state and federal law supersedes township authority. However, the intent here is a transparent process. The request is first sent to the Planning Commission, where a public hearing will be held, and a recommendation would be made to the Township Board. So that is the summary of what is in the latest draft of the ordinance. And Mr. Supervisor, do you want me to answer questions now, or do you want to wait?
If any of the board members have questions, we can ask them with the next agenda item.
Okay.
But Mr. Box or Mr. Eloy, did you have anything else to add to the presentation before we open the public hearing?
Not at this time, no.
Only that the enforcement section of the ordinance is in the General Code of Ordinances. So section 1-9 talks about enforcement of general ordinances. And if there's a violation of this ordinance, it is a misdemeanor, which is punishable by $500 up to 90 days in jail. It also gives the right of the township to enforce by injunction and other remedies. So they work in conjunction with each other. The language of section 1-9 states that if an enforcement provision isn't specifically provided in that section of the ordinance, that general enforcement section will apply.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eloy. Thank you, Mr. Carlisle. So with that, I am now going to open the public hearing. Time is 7:08 p.m. So anyone who wishes to make public comment for this portion of the public hearing, same rules apply. You may approach the microphone on the right-hand side of the room. You'll have a 3-minute time limit. And if any of your comments wish to be addressed by any of the board members or staff, they will do so at a later time in the meeting.
John Parkinson, once again, Mr. Supervisor, members of the board. Upon reviewing the latest draft, I must ask if you, the board, as a whole, agree to this draft, or is it being pushed on you by one member of the board? If you all agreed to this current draft as it is written, do you all agree in all of its terms and definitions? I will demand an answer from you all during discussion. The purpose of this ordinance is to protect, preserve, and promote the health, safety, welfare, comfort, and prosperity of the citizens of Macomb Township through regulation of the production of emission of noises or amplified speech, music, or other sounds that tend to annoy, disturb, or frighten township residents. Board, if you agree with the purpose of the amended ordinance, you would have to agree that any religious compound, enclave, or village would seriously go against that purpose, especially a call to prayer 5 times a day. This would be annoying for many residents. In Section 2, subsection 7, you use terms like intermittent sound, and in 8, mixed-use property. Could that term be used to describe a park or say a religious village? We, your bosses, see you. But wait, there's more. You say sleep facilities should be considered, as well as the time of day and duration. Those are great, but then let's go to the exemptions. Noise resulting from the following activity shall be exempt from the maximum permitted sound levels, provided such activity occurs in a legally accepted manner. It was nice to see you guys added generators. However, we have concerns over 5D. Events approved by the township as described in zoning ordinance section 10.0349. Would you as individuals consider a call to prayer over loudspeakers an exemption? I'd like that answer too. Another thing we find interesting is that you have specified times for many things like construction and other things. However, you did not impose a time restriction on spoken word or other means of announcing an activity. I have spoken about RUPLA at previous meetings. I have proven you can deny land use under RUPLA, Club v. Chicago, case number 94C615. We, your bosses, ask you to vote no on this noise ordinance. If you must amend the ordinance, please do so in a manner not to violate your own purpose and listen to the people you serve at the pleasure of. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak? None? Oh, here we go. Sure.
Good evening. My name is Dave Lux, and I live in Macomb Township on Old Brook Lane. I'm here backed by a lot of people. Not too many people are going to speak, but obviously I represent a lot more than just myself here tonight. I want to address the concern that many of us in the community share about the proposed change to the sound ordinance. The plan to allow religious loudspeakers to broadcast live 5 times a day is troubling for several reasons. Our community values peace and quiet. This proposed change would disrupt the tranquility, significantly impact our daily lives. We've built a neighborhood where calm and peaceful living is a priority, and frequent loudspeaker announcements would undermine that. Additionally, the idea of creating a community specifically for one religious group, like the proposed Muslim community, that doesn't align with the inclusive values of our township. We pride ourselves on being a diverse community where people of all backgrounds and beliefs coexist harmoniously. This diversity is our strength, and everyone contributes to our community regardless of their faith. We fully support religious freedom, but it shouldn't come at the expense of peaceful living environment. Focusing on one group risks creating divisions and goes against the inclusive spirit that defines our township. We urge the board to reconsider this proposal and look for alternatives that respect everyone's needs. Let's find a solution that upholds our shared values of tolerance, inclusivity, and harmony. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?
Lisa Ranoli, I live in Macomb on Chesterburg Drive. One of my concerns is with the adults and children who have special needs and some serious mental illnesses. I can tell you from experience that the Saturday fire whistle that goes off at noon or 1 o'clock can send some people right over the edge, but parents and caregivers can plan for that because it happens once a week. Or is it once a month? Okay, once a month, sorry. But this is something that can be planned for. We have group homes, we have a veterans facility, and then we have adults and children that are living in single-family homes. And I think that would put an undue burden onto the people that are caring for the people with these needs who are already living in our township. Just something else for you to consider, please.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, I don't see anyone else. Last call. All right, I'm going to close this public hearing. Time is 7:16 p.m. This takes us to item 10. This is the postpone from April 24th, 2024. This is a request to amend the nuisance ordinance, Chapter 11, Article 3, to address noise.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Trustee Kuzma will second the motion.
Mr. Box?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Board. You all have a copy of the updated version in your packet, as well as I handed each of you a copy this evening. There was an additional copy that showed the comparison or the changes that have taken place since you last reviewed it about a month and a half ago. Other than that, I think Mr. Carlisle did a great job explaining what the noise ordinance is, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Box. Anyone from the board have questions?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I have a few questions. What is the current noise ordinance? Through the chair. What is the current noise ordinance that has been mentioned by members of the public that should not be changed? Does anyone know exactly the citation?
I don't know the exact citation, but I know. Mr. Box, why don't you go ahead and answer as best you can?
I don't have the exact verbiage in front of me, but it's a nuisance ordinance, and it references disturbing the peace, which I think we discussed when we talked about this the last time we were here with the noise ordinance. It becomes difficult to enforce, and I'm sure Mr. Carlisle can weigh in on that a little bit too, but a disturbance of the peace to you might be different than the person next to you or the person down the road from you. So creating some sort of a measurable standard seems to be the prevalent form of a noise ordinance.
Yeah, I will agree with that proposition. I will read for benefit of the members of the public who are present here and also will be watching this on recorded media. It is at section 11-40, definitions. The following words, terms, and phrases, when used in this article, should have the meaning ascribed to them in this section, except where the context clearly indicates a different meaning. Person shall mean an individual, firm, co-partnership, or corporation. In the case of corporations, the directors and officers shall be responsible parties under the terms of this article. Next section is section 11.41. Does this sound like the ordinance as it exists? And it's very short. Hours limited. It shall be unlawful for any person to use, operate, or cause to be used or operated within the township any steam, gasoline, or motor-driven or power excavating, grading, construction, or erection equipment, or like or any similar equipment, the use of or operation which creates or has a tendency to create the emission of odors, fumes, or smoke, or which creates noise or vibration, resulting in the disturbance of the peace and quiet of the township upon any Sunday or legal holiday prior to 12 p.m. noon, or upon any other day of the week prior to 7 a.m. in the morning or after 7 p.m. in the post-noon, except for road construction projects which may operate until 10 p.m. And then it goes into variances, which I won't bother reading, but it's basically, and the only other exception is provisions of this article shall not apply to such use or operation of equipment is required to safeguard life or property. So, are any of the concerns that have been expressed by the members of the public covered by the ordinance as it currently exists? Through the chair to Mr. Bach.
I think any noise is addressed in this ordinance, whether or not they view certain things as being covered, I guess would be up to them, but really it's more about how loud the noise is, not where it's coming from. This ordinance doesn't take into factor where specific noise is, is it a car, is it, whatever creating the noise. It's just measuring how loud it is at the property boundaries.
But isn't it
I
true?
don't think that was the trustee's question. I think you were asking about the existing ordinance?
Existing
Correct.
ordinance, does it address any of the issues that have been mentioned by the members of the public?
No.
Okay, so as I understand it, the general term of disturbing the peace is somewhat vague. Is that a fair statement?
It's very vague, and what we found in case law was that many judges have indicated that it's impossible to enforce because it would essentially leave judgment up to the enforcement officer or law officer who arrives on the scene to decide whether that is actually disturbing the peace or not.
Thank you, sir. I have a couple of questions of Mr. Carlisle. What other noise ordinances have you written for other municipalities?
What other noise ordinances?
Yes.
I've written literally dozens of them in zoning ordinances. I've worked on Independence Township's noise ordinance, dealing with Pine Knob. I had some involvement in the regulation of the noise and the noise regulations with the Waterfield Hill Racetrack. Assisting right now in writing a new ordinance for the city of Berkeley. I mean, literally every new zoning ordinance that we have written, we've updated the noise ordinance provisions.
Have you done any comparisons with other municipalities that are adjacent to or in the vicinity of Macomb Township?
Yes.
Which ones?
Clinton Township, Shelby, Sterling Heights, those were three in particular.
Okay, Clinton Township, is it under the nuisance? Is it under nuisance? Because I looked up Clinton Township and I didn't see anything relating to noise.
There's really, to be very honest, with all three of the ones that I just cited, they are not nearly as comprehensive as this ordinance.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment.
And I think as I prefaced my presentation, I believe that I think Clinton Township's was, fairly recently updated, but the other ones that were suggested that we take a look at being nearby, are not as current, or not that current, 10 to 15 years old.
Well, I looked at Sterling Heights, and it said loud noise, any sound which due to its volume, duration, or character, a noise disturbs, injures, or endangers the comfort, health, peace, and safety of the reasonable persons of ordinary sensibilities.
Yeah.
The term shall be limited to noise heard on a public street, parking lot open to the public, or other public space, any church or hospital or any occupied building which is not the source of the noise, including grounds surrounding the building. Unless otherwise provided in this chapter, the zoning ordinance, noise shall be determined at a distance of at least 50 feet measured in a straight line from the source of the noise. So is that consistent with your opinion that the proposed Macomb Township ordinance is highly detailed and specific?
Yes.
Okay.
The Sterling Heights ordinance is not that dissimilar, frankly, from the sort of the generalized language that's in your ordinance. And in absence of any standards, I don't know how you enforce an ordinance like this.
And that goes to my next question. You indicated that the ordinance should have clear enforcement procedures. Could you reference specifically which section of the proposed ordinance is clear in its enforcement procedures?
Well, the enforcement procedures are, you have a separate enforcement section in the ordinance for violations. It's 1-9, where where all of your general ordinances are enforced. But if you receive a complaint, you have measurable standards in this proposed ordinance that the enforcement staff are able to go out and make a determination as to whether this ordinance is violated or not. And then you follow the ordinance procedures for writing a ticket or whatever other punitive action needs to take place.
Well, it's been insinuated and maybe explicitly stated that this board is somehow or another colluding with persons or entities for purposes of establishing loopholes for that particular group of persons. Does that argument hold any water, or does this ordinance merely codify and erect standards by which noise can be judged? And if anything, isn't it true that it could be used to regulate that noise from whatever source?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as a matter of fact, some of the sources that were being cited by members of the public actually do have to comply with the noise standards, unless there is, and that's why, however, if there is for some reason a overriding authority beyond beyond the township that you have to consider either through state or federal law, that is why the board has the procedure in here to be able to grant deviations. And let me say one other thing. I mean, regardless of how sound is generated, whether it's mechanically or whether it is electronically generated, it's all subject to the same limitations. It's no different. So if I'm standing here speaking to you in a normal tone of voice, obviously, and there's a noise standard that cannot be exceeded, and I pick up an amplifier of some type, and that noise is exceeded, that's a violation of the ordinance. It doesn't matter. It's the same sound, essentially, whether, and frankly, many places of assembly and places of worship use amplified church bells.
We're using amplification in our voice now, correct?
Yeah.
And isn't it true that priests who use wireless microphones at Sunday Mass amplify their voice to above that standard?
Yes, yes.
Excuse me. Thank you.
All right.
So,
And it's also been suggested that there's discriminatory, a proposal, whether or not this is accurate, I don't pass judgment on, but that there'd be just a development that's discriminatory. Isn't it true that that's a totally separate law, which would be the Fair Housing Act of 1968, and not having to do with, anything to do with this board?
well, that's a legal question.
That's a legal question for council.
Are you speaking about the inclusive communities that they're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a separate issue. That's a fair housing issue. It has nothing to do with this noise ordinance.
Okay.
I think what Trustee Kuzmano asked is had the board itself would weigh in on fair housing issues.
We can't.
And it's because we lack standing, because we're not injured by the discriminatory practice.
Correct.
Okay. So anyone who's been denied, just generally and off topic, anyone who's been denied the purchase or rental of a facility in such a development would have a cause of action against the developer of that or the owner of those properties.
A private cause of action, yes.
Yes. All right. Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if it's appropriate at this time to address Mr. Parkinson's comment that whether or not we read, I will state that I read the language of the ordinance. I find it unremarkable. I think that it does regulate with some specific standards which are able to pass muster if scrutinized by a court of law. I didn't find that there was cooking of the language in order to favor one particular developer or any individual. As a matter of fact, I find it to be far more specific than what we currently have, and see that it's basically to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community of Macomb Township residents. Because it's somewhat, it's not completely bulletproof, but it's at least more, how should I put it, specific so that it can be enforced. And it has organized standards which can be used to diminish loud noise in our community. Other than that, I do have a problem with the enforcement provision, which was mentioned earlier, in that I think that it should include a explicit provision that violation of the ordinance is a misdemeanor, and that it is punishable by a fine of up to $500 in 90 days, similar to the waste hauling contract ordinance. But for that reason alone, I will be voting no. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, before we address that, Trustee Kuzmano, I just want to clarify your first question to Mr. Box. In our current ordinances, there are two sections that address noise in general. One is the nuisance, which is the section that we're changing now. And the items that you read regarding construction, the only thing that's covered under the nuisance ordinance is construction. There's nothing else in it. There is a separate spot where disturbing the peace is listed as an offense. That is still there. And the reason that's still there, for example, is if one of our sheriffs shows up at a house party at 1 a.m., there are things that are overtly disturbing the peace and obviously disturbing the peace, which we believe that they can easily cite and clear a house. However, when we get into the nuance of people's enjoyment of their property, there are no specific standards that we can apply. So that's why the nuisance ordinance is being amended.
Okay.
Would that be an accurate description, Josh?
That's
And
correct.
Ben,
If
to
I
your
could
understanding?
Ask for clarification. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Let me finish.
I believe that's correct.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I was able, due to the generosity of the people of Macomb Township, to have that available, so I looked it up in Muni Code. What you're referring to is in under section 12-166, breach of peace.
Correct.
Any
Breach
person
of
who
peace.
shall make or assist in making any noise, disturbance, trouble, or improper diversion, or any rout or riot by which peace and good order of the township is disturbed shall be guilty of breach of the peace and disorderly conduct.
Correct.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to bring a point of clarification for Mr. Cusimano. I just want to understand your last statement there, because section 1.9 is the enforcement section which applies to this noise ordinance. And because if you read 1.9, it states, unless another penalty is expressly provided by this code for any particular provision or section, every person convicted of a violation of any provision of this code shall be punished by a fine of not more than $500 or imprisonment of not more than 90 days, or by both such fine and imprisonment. And it goes on and it talks about injunctions and recovery of attorney fees. That is a general enforcement provision which applies to, it's not specifically stated in the noise ordinance section, but it applies because it's in the Code of Ordinances. So it does have an enforcement section, and it does have the enforcement request that you have in there.
Through the chair, I have concerns whether or not the violation would be possibly considered or construed as a civil violation, and is not specifically prescribed as a misdemeanor.
So can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
It was within your right to propose to amend the ordinance that's in front of us to include those two clauses that are in the waste hauler ordinance for enforcement.
Mr. Drolet has to do that.
Or specifically reference the remedies in section 1.9 shall be the enforcement
Yeah.
of this code.
Right.
If you want something that ties it in specifically, we can do that.
If I may, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
So would the mechanism to do that be to specify in the proposed amended ordinance that we're proposing tonight, to specify the enforcement mechanism shall be, and then list that section?
Yeah, so we would add a section 9, which says enforcement, and simply say the enforcement of this ordinance is specifically stated in section 1-9, general penalties, or shall be, or violations of this ordinance shall be enforced in accordance with that section. And so it ties it in even more. I think it already ties it in section 1.9, to be honest, but if you want a double tie-in, that's the way you do it.
I would be amenable to that amendment if the second was amenable to that amendment as well.
I approve the amendment.
Is the second
Is Trustee
okay, is
Cusmano.
Trustee Cusmano.
So,
Okay.
so therefore, we would, again, amend it to specify the enforcement mechanism is the mechanism that exists to enforce ordinances with regard, including misdemeanor and,
Injunction, attorney fees, whatever stated in 1.9
yeah,
is the enforcement mechanism for this specific ordinance.
okay. Thank you.
Okay. Did you have other issues you
I
wanted
do
to bring
not,
up?
Mr. Chair, thank you.
Yes, Trustee Lucido.
A couple of things. In the interest of full transparency, there's people here tonight, there's people in the United States that no matter what I say, you're not going to believe me. And I'm okay with that. It is what it is. It's part of the job. But I'm going to be as open and honest about how I make a decision as I can be. It has nothing to do with anything going on behind the scenes, whether you choose to believe that or not, fine. I run through scenarios. I say, if we did this, this. If we did this, this. So my questions were, 1, we passed the ordinance. We worry about, and again, I'm going to stop there and say, we know why everybody's here. It's not about a generator. It's not about a school event. It's about this YouTube video for 25 and Foss, 24 and Foss. Okay? That's what it's about. It's got nothing to do with public health, safety, anything like that. It has to do with the YouTube video. So I'm going to stop there on that portion of it. So if we pass the ordinance and we say that we are putting parameters for our township, not 24 and Foss, we're talking about our township. We keep drawing lines back to 24 and Foss. So I'll speak to 24 and Foss. If we were to pass a ban on outdoor speakers as part of this amendment, or part of this amendment to the nuisance ordinance, and I'll speak to Mr. Olea through the
Certainly.
chair. If we were to pass a ban on outdoor speakers to not allow 24 and Foss to do their spoken word, do we have the authority to do that? Or would we be superseded by anything federally or statewide?
Are you saying banning speakers, for instance,
Banning speakers
for worship,
for worship,
for religious,
because
for
we're going to
religious
talk about
organizations?
24 and Foss, because that is why everybody's here.
So let's talk about two ways.
25 and Foss.
Let's talk about it's
Excuse
25
me,
and
can we let
Foss.
the attorney answer, please?
It's 25 and Foss. So let's talk about it two ways. If you ban speakers, that means you can't have any speakers for any activities. You have to treat non-secular, which are non-religious, activities the same as religious. So that means no speakers for football games, no speakers for public activities, nothing. You have to treat everyone the same.
So we can't, in the United States of America, just decide we want to block them, but we don't want to block them. We can't do that?
Specifically, what you can't do is impose a regulation on a religious institution that's not imposed on non-religious institutions. So, for instance, if you say no loudspeakers for any church activity, you're treating them differently. So we talk about RLUIPA, okay? This is what RLUIPA does. RLUIPA says it's a federal law, and it can be imposed, and what happens is if we pass an ordinance which the U.S. Department of Justice believes is in violation of religious freedom, it will enforce it under RLUIPA, okay? If the religious institution believes that it's a violation of their religious rights, they enforce it under RLUIPA. So this is what we cannot do. We cannot impose a substantial burden on the religious exercise of a person or institution except where justified by a compelling state interest that the government pursues in the least restrictive means possible. Religious assemblies and institutions must be treated at least as well as non-religious assemblies and institutions. So you can't say the football game down the street can have the loudspeakers, or this event can have loudspeakers, but the religious institution cannot. A government cannot unreasonably limit religious assemblies, institutions, or structures within a jurisdiction. So let's look at what the way this code reads, okay? So the operation of any use of any organ, bell, chimes, music, spoken word, or other similar means of announcing an activity at a place of assembly or worship is subject to the applicable noise control standards for the zoning category which it is located, unless otherwise required by applicable state or federal law. So we can't do it in a way that violates RLUIPA, but this is what we've done. If it's in a residential zone, the decibel level applies to that residential zone. It also applies to the standards that are within the ordinance, because every ordinance is written together. You have to harmonize all the provisions. So the general requirements apply, which says that no use, operation, activity shall be carried on that causes or creates noise levels that are unreasonably loud or that unreasonably interfere with the peace and comfort of others, or that exceed the maximum noise level limits prescribed in the table, as measured at any point at the property adjacent or in close proximity to the unit or lot, parcel, or property on which the noise-generating operation or activity is located. So again, any religious, non-religious activity is measured by that standard with the measurement levels, okay? And the other thing it talks about is intermittent or unreasonable sounds, which is something that People are saying that we've masked and we're allowing those things, but intermittent sounds or sounds characterized by pure tones might be a source of complaints, even though the measured sound level does not exceed the permitted levels in the table. Such sounds shall be prohibited when found to be unreasonably loud or unreasonably interfere with the peace and comfort of others. In making such determination, the following shall be considered: the proximity of the sound to sleeping facilities, the time, day or night of which the sound occurs, and the duration of the sound. Those are all factors. So as we enforce this ordinance as time goes on, regardless of whether it's a non-religious organization or a religious organization, then all those standards apply. And there may be a battle down the road with some religious organization, wherever they are, where they say this substantially burdens our right to exercise religion. We don't know if that will ever come to being. But if it does, those are the standards we apply. Those are the standards that we're going to stand behind. And if there's a private lawsuit by whatever religious organization or the U.S. Department of Justice, we'll have to deal with that accordingly. But we're very comfortable as attorneys, as administrators, as our consultant, that we've done everything we can to treat everyone equally. Non-secular, secular, and that's what the law requires. I know people have come up here citing case law from the Eastern District of Illinois, which doesn't apply to us because we're in Michigan, and the Sixth Circuit is the one that applies. And that's what it talks about, is that if a law treats everyone equally, secular and non-secular, then it will pass constitutional standards. But the minute that you treat a religious organization, for instance, differently than a secular organization or non-secular, and you give them more rights that substantially burdens their freedom, then that's when we get into trouble under constitutional scrutiny. We think we've done a very good job of leveling the field on that, and so that's why we stand by what we wrote in this ordinance.
Thank you. Then if I can continue.
Yes.
So again, in full transparency, I already read the law that he's stating. I went through that scenario and I said, for me, that is not in the best interest of the township as a whole. Maybe those that live within 1,000 feet of 24, 25 and Foss, fine, but not for the township as a whole. So then I go to part two and I say, let's do nothing. Let's vote this down and do nothing. Do we have any ordinance that would stop a call to prayer on 24 Mile Road and Foss, 25 and Foss, either one? Well, I want to connect those two in a minute because a comment was made in the beginning that does connect those two. But on 25 and Foss, under the current ordinance as it sits, if we vote this down, we know we can't ban outdoor speakers. If we do nothing and say, no, we're voting this down, do we have anything that can stop them from doing it at that point?
Well, I don't know that we can stop them from doing a call to prayer. It's a religious exercise on their property, and that would be unconstitutional. But what we've done here is whatever their religious exercise is, it has to be within the standards that are set across the board. And the residential level of noise, it has to be done in time, place, and manner. All those things are things that are considered in our enforcement.
So I move on to option 3. Pass this ordinance, which in my opinion is what's best for the township as a whole. I understand that it is going to upset a small number of people. They don't like it, they don't understand it, but they are basing their decision on a YouTube video. I am not basing my decisions for this township on a YouTube video. And I've said it many times. There's no proposed amendment, there's no proposed development there.
All right, can you
There is
let
nothing there.
Trustee Lucido finish his comments, please?
There is no proposed development at 25 and Foss. There is no proposed development at 24 and Foss. There is a YouTube video. We are not making decisions. I'm not making decisions on this board based on a YouTube video till I have something to discuss. Let's do this one step at a time for what you all think is happening at 24 and Foss, 25 and Foss. Let something be proposed, then we can discuss it. Simple as that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any others on the board have a comment or question?
I have a comment.
Go ahead, Charlie.
One, I want to thank the residents for coming out. It's good to see everyone. But as you all know, or you don't know, I'm probably, me and Nancy are the oldest ones here. Okay, now we're not talking age, Nancy. All right, but we've been around. And I think you could agree with me, Nancy, but I will say it. Look at this community right now. Look at the new roads. Look at the new parks. Look at the new Park and Rec building that we built 20 years ago. You have to put some trust in this board. You have to put trust in our legal. We got great legal, just like we got a great fire department and a great police department. So please, like Pete said, there is nothing yet. Put some trust in this Macomb Township Board. And that's all I can tell you. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Anyone else?
Mr.
Nancy, do you
Chairman.
want to?
Yes, I would just like to say, it is incredible to sit next to this gentleman. He gets to the nub of the problem. He is not afraid to say his mind and to summarize the problem. It's a complex problem, but as he said, nothing has come to planning yet. And I'd also like to say that this has been, in my opinion, a huge comprehensive study about what we need to do for this township that will affect everyone in the township. It's been professionally stated. It's professionally done. The consultant, thank you for your effort, time, and money and effort from our planner, and has been concentrating on this one issue. So thank you, Mr. Lucido, for your clarity. And Mr. Aloya you have to understand, we do not want to be in a position where we are being sued. That would not.
Enough. Enough.
Anyway, that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Nevers. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, I got a follow-up.
Sure.
I want to confirm that what Attorney Aloya said is my understanding of the law as well. You know, we pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. Well, as elected officials, we also take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America and the state of Michigan. And the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's what I took an oath to uphold. And I want to congratulate Trustee Lucido for speaking his mind and speaking what he considers to be the truth of what the status of this ordinance is. Mr. Chairman, I would ask that the specific language of the statute or the proposed ordinance be amended to include, and again, this is subject to the motion maker's approval, any person who violates this provision of this chapter shall be guilty of a misdemeanor punishable in accordance with section 1-9, period. That's what's in the waste hauler ordinance or the garbage, trash, and refuse ordinance, and I ask that it be specifically incorporated, that same language in the statute.
I would agree to that amendment.
And the second agrees?
He is the
I know,
second.
but just double checking.
Opposes it.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
All right. Any other board members have questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, there was a gentleman that had the courage to go to the podium and ask a few questions, so I would just like to take the opportunity to get his questions answered. If I may, to address Mr. Box. He mentioned having a party in his backyard that has a DJ, and what I believe to be was a concern that he would have to get a permit for that if this was adopted. Can you put some clarification to that?
So the way it's written, any noise that violates what the thresholds are set in that table would be a violation of the ordinance.
So
the
I think
special
I'm
events.
sorry to interrupt. I think what he specifically asked is if he had speakers in his backyard for a party. would he be able to do that without having to come to the board for, he said a permit, but it'd be for a variation?
So long as he doesn't violate the threshold set for his zoning category.
Okay?
Okay. Also, he had a question with regards to the zoning. Could you address that question as well?
Yeah, I think the question was with regards to
Residential.
what.
Do churches fit, where do churches fit in zoning? 'Cause
Correct.
I had the same note.
And I
was
think
gonna
Mr.
ask.
Aloya read that earlier, that they are judged based on the zoning category that they are established.
It's a little off topic because I think he was specifically, I didn't mean to hijack your question. He was specifically asking where in the zoning code do churches fit?
Oh, okay, I understand better now. They are a special land use in almost every zoning category.
And can you tell us what a special land use for those who might not know?
So a special land use is a process that would go before the planning commission. It would require a public hearing, and there are some standards established in the ordinance to justify whether a special land use would be granted or denied.
Okay, time out. You just have to wait. Yes.
Let her
Wait,
finish.
I'm waiting.
I interrupted her twice. Sorry.
So, okay, so you've answered that question for the gentleman also. My question is, I believe it came to light today that the ringing of the bells at churches appears to be done through a loudspeaker attached to the side of a building. Is that correct?
In many cases, that's correct.
And do we have any information as to what decibels the ringing of the bells, I'm talking in our local area, that is done through a loudspeaker attached to the side of the building is?
So I did go out and measure with a decibel reader at 23 and Romeo Plank, the place of worship there, and I believe it was around 70 decibels. I was across the street. I was in the parking lot of it was a Walgreens or CVS, taking that reading. However, we've talked about ambient noise. The vehicles driving by were at a louder decibel than that, and at 21 and Romeo Plank, they were kind enough to actually ring their actual bell for me, so I could stand there and measure it, which they also indicated that they only ring at funerals now. That's the only time that they ring their bell. And that decibel reading, I believe, was 65 or 68. I'd have to check, but it was in the 60s.
Okay. And then it is my understanding in the proposed ordinance that these decibel levels have restrictions that increase as the time goes on in the day.
I'm sorry.
So like if from 7 to 9, the decibel levels are required to be lower than if they were at
Correct.
from 9
That's
to
correct.
2.
That's correct.
Okay. What I would like to express is there was the question as to how this came about. And there's been statements that we need to listen to our constituents. So you're all aware the reason this came about is because of our constituents. Suddenly, in a board meeting, there was constant question about noise ordinance. And it was often referred to the call of prayer was a concern. As your leaders, we looked into the ordinance to find out if this is a concern for all of you and how can we reassure you that it shouldn't be. When we went into the ordinance, we found that there were no enforceable measurements to prevent anything, not just call to prayer, but any sound or noise to disrupt you. And that's a problem. So we listened to you all, and we looked into the ordinance, and then we did the research to find what decibels would be considered annoying or disturbing, and we put something in place to avoid anyone, not just one community, but anyone from being able to do that. The ordinance that we have right now is a free-for-all. You've all been fortunate that you haven't had to be in a position to where you were disturbed enough that we had to refer back to it to find that there's absolutely nothing we could do for you. Nothing. So now, if this ordinance is passed this evening, question is if it becomes an issue, I want you to remember what I just said. The churches that surround you currently are ringing the bells through a loudspeaker attached to the side of the church. Have you been disturbed? Has your life changed? You don't get to yell while I'm talking. So I would like to say that it hasn't. But now we're putting a measure in place that if it exceeds something that does disrupt your livelihood, your quality of life, we can react. Prior to today, prior to anything being accepted tonight, we cannot react. You're on your own. So we're listening to you. I know it's disruptive to you, it's concerning to you. We all know that. We're trying to answer, we're trying to put something in place to prevent your lives from being disrupted. And that's what's happening here. And I hope that you can see going forward that we're looking to be able to enforce and protect you from something that would make your quality of life less than. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Clerk Posey. Is there anyone else?
I got a quick question for Josh. Mr. Brock, what does this do to New Year's and 4th of July, where the fireworks, are them excluded? The fireworks, people,
Specifically, which fireworks?
you know, when people go out in
Any
the street
any fireworks.
Any fireworks would be subject to this unless it's part of a special event.
Okay, so you know, we all know people blow off fireworks, and that's fine. But if somebody decides at 3:30 in the morning they're going to start their fireworks, this, and again, just like Ms. Posey said, this would help that community.
That's correct.
To go to law enforcement and say, hey, everyone did their fireworks at generally when the sun goes down, but this particular person now decides to start at 3 in the morning and disrupt the whole neighborhood. Now we have an ordinance with some teeth that we could actually enforce. Because if we didn't have that, if I understand all this, the law enforcement would go there and they'd say, we don't have an ordinance that we can enforce. And therefore, this person could continue. Am I following this right?
For the most part, the law enforcement may be able to go there and talk somebody out of performing some loud noise, but should it escalate, I think the understanding is that it wouldn't be enforceable by any court of law.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Box.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Box, I had two things. Mr. Parkinson asked about special events. Can you tell us what a special event is in reference to this ordinance?
Sure, we have a number of special events in the township. It's a process. There's an application. In the application, you indicate what your event is. If you're setting up a tent, if you're having some special gathering. I think there's a run the plank thing that goes on every year. That is a special event. El Charro does a special event for Cinco de Mayo every year. So it's an application. It's a process indicating what you intend to do for your special event. There's limitations on how many days and how many per year one location can have.
And how many is that? Do you know off the top of your head how many events per year?
I believe it's 4 times per year, and they have to be more than 30 days apart.
So somebody doing something every weekend or every day would not be a special event?
Correct.
Okay. The other thing I just want to walk through just real quick is the deviation process. So in the deviation section, let me get to it. Section 7. So there's 2 different standards that this section applies. So the first one has 3 hurdles, and they all have to be met. And I'm going to read all 3. So the board finds, A, there are special circumstances or conditions affecting the use, operation, or activity such that a strict application of the provisions of the chapter would be to deprive the applicant of a reasonable use of his property, and the deviation is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of the substantial right of the owner or tenant of the use, operation, activity, and is the minimum variation required, and the granting of the deviation will not be detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to other property in the area in which the property is situated. So that a applicant would have to satisfy all 3 of those hurdles, correct?
That's correct.
And I see that as a reasonably high standard. The second one is state and federal law supersedes township authority, which I think Mr. Loya already adequately covered. So those are not automatic. Any institution, religious, secular, or otherwise, that intends to exceed the ordinances that are, or the decibel levels that are in the table in the earlier part of the ordinance would have to come to the township, go to the planning commission, go through a public hearing. The planning commission would then make a recommendation to the board, and then this board would decide whether or not to grant that deviation. So nothing that has been discussed tonight as a concern is being permitted through this ordinance. If somebody were to want to deviate from the ordinance limits, they would have to come to the board and ask for it and demonstrate why their instance has federal or state protections. Mr. Loya?
Yeah, I just want to add to what you said and what Mr. Oliver asked. Fireworks is governed actually by state law, so that's what would govern fireworks. So it works hand in hand with it, but really state law requires it. And I also want to add something to what Clerk Posey said. Part of the reason why we went forward to review this noise ordinance, as everyone knows, we're an intense development community, meaning we have a lot of development going on, and we get a lot of complaints regarding noises for that development. So, in conjunction with Clerk Posey said, is that internally as a staff, we've looked at this and said we need to do something about it, because the breach of the peace standard, what would happen is the sheriff would go out and say this is breaching the peace, and the person who's making the noise says no, it's not, and it's a subjective standard. So we're going to court, and a judge is going to decide whether it breaches the peace or not, and it's a subjective standard. So now we have objective standards that we can enforce. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Loya. I don't have anything else. Does anyone else on this board have a comment or question on the motion?
One last comment, Mr. Chairman. I was in front of my house in Ultimate Farm subdivision watering some flowers my daughter had put in, and a van was driving by from one of the local fertilizer or grass companies. And the individual had the window down and his arm out the window. And he looked at me as he drove by. We made eye contact. And he said, "It's way too quiet in this neighborhood." And my response was, "That's the way we like it." So I just wanted to add that little vignette.
Thank you, Trustee Cusmano.
One real quick thing.
Of course, Charlie.
To the residents that come here, just a reminder to understand, we all live here too. 7 of us live here. 7 of us are in this community every day. So what we propose and vote on, we have to take it ourselves. So just to understand that, we're all in this together. So that's it.
Thank you, Charlie. If there's no more questions or discussion, we have a motion by Treasurer Gillette, supported by Trustee Cusmano, to amend the nuisance ordinance, Chapter 11, Section 3, to address noise, including the amendment added by Trustee Cusmano. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That motion carries. Moving on to item 11. Is a request to approve the cleaning of 5 sanitary sewer locations by Rogue Industrial Services, the amount of $11,765.85. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Johnson.
All right, good evening, Board. These are just 5 sanitary sewer locations that need to be cleaned based on the data we found during our hydraulic model study. So we just need to get these cleaned just to make sure our study is accurate, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Welcome.
Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, motion by Trustee Oliver, supported by Clerk Posey, to approve the cleaning of 5 sanitary sewer locations by Rogue Industrial Services in the amount of $11,765.85. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Thank you, Mr. Carlisle. Moving on to item 12 is a request for an extension of time for the preliminary plan for the Bluffs at Riverside, permanent parcel IDs 0823251003 and 0823276009.
Support.
Is there a second?
Trustee Kuzma.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Frank. Sorry. Well, you said support, didn't you?
Yes.
I think someone seconded
He did.
before a motion.
He
was
did.
made.
I just
Oh,
didn't
did
hear
I
you.
accidentally over-support?
You could never.
Okay.
Any, Mr. Box?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Board. The Bluffs at Riverside is seeking an extension of time for their preliminary plan. This is a single-family residential development on the west side of North Avenue, south of 23 Mile. It's just south of the North Branch of the Clinton River. This was approved in 2022. They are seeking a 2-year extension of time, although they did indicate at the Planning Commission meeting that they do intend to break ground next spring, but they are seeking 2-year extension just in case they are unable to break ground next spring. Planning Commission did review this and is recommending approval.
Thank you, Mr. Box. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, motion by trustee Kuzmano, supported by treasurer Gillette, to approve the extension of time for the preliminary plan, the Bluffs at Riverside, permanent parcel IDs 0823251003 and 0823276009. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Next item is a request to approve an updated fee schedule.
Motion to approve.
Support.
Mr. Box.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Board. The fee schedule was last updated in November. The only addition or change is the addition of the collection containers, the administrative fee for an application, as well as fees for impoundment or storage if they are impounded. You may recall a number of board meetings ago, we approved a new ordinance for these collection containers. And as they are working towards becoming compliant with the township, we need to establish a fee for them to apply.
Thank you, Mr. Box. Any questions or discussion?
Quick discussion, if I may, Mr. Chair. This is, applies to the charitable, what are perceived to be charitable bins that are put out sometimes outside of municipal or buildings, often usually commercial buildings, where you donate shoes or clothes. And quite a few of these bins, so to speak, are not run by charities. And oftentimes the phone number listed on them doesn't even go through. And in many cases, like at Kroger at 26 and Romeo Plank, I've seen just piles of bags outside these bins, overflowing these bins.
Josh, put it up on the screen.
Yeah. That. I mean, so our ordinance that we've imposed is to clean this mess up, so that if you're going to have a bin for collecting shoes, clothing, and so forth, that it's got to be permitted and you've got to take care of it, and you've got to maintain it, and there has to be somebody responsible for it. I'm looking forward to this ordinance fully kicking in, so we can clean up some of these eyesores.
If I could add to that too, an additional portion of the ordinance provides transparency. It requires them to indicate whether they are a for-profit or a nonprofit organization.
Thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer Gillette. Anyone else? Hearing none, motion by Clerk Posey, supported by Trustee Lucido, to approve the updated fee schedule. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. This will take us to item 14, a request to approve a banked parking agreement with the mobile pit stop at 26 Mile and Romeo Plank. This is permanent parcel ID 0806200050. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Give it to Charlie.
Charlie. Mr. Box.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Board. This banked parking agreement, as you mentioned, is for the mobile pit stop at 26 Mile and Romeo Plank. They did come before the Planning Commission, and they're going to be expanding the facility there. Part of that requires additional parking, some of which they intend to build, some of which they feel strongly that they don't need that much parking. So there is a provision in the ordinance that allows the Planning Commission to approve their plan subject to what's known as a banked parking agreement, which is what's before you this evening. So essentially what this says is that they are building this site shy of what would normally be required in terms of parking spaces, but they have dedicated a portion of the property that will be undeveloped for the future addition of parking spaces, and then it gives the township the authority, if at any point we feel there is a parking issue, we can step in and say, okay, now you have to build these spaces. The agreement was drafted by an attorney and has been reviewed, and staff is in support of this.
Thank you, Mr. Box. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none. Motion by trustee Oliver, supported by trustee Nevers, to approve a banked parking agreement at the mobile pit stop at 26 Mile Romeo Plank, permanent parcel 08062000050. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Next item, request to purchase 62 sets of structural firefighting turnout gear from Municipal Emergency Services in the amount of $314,774.
So move.
Support.
Deputy Chief.
Good evening. This evening, I'm requesting your approval to purchase 62 sets of structural firefighting gear per Michigan MIOSHA Part 74, as well as NFPA 1971, which is a standard on firefighter protection ensemble for structural firefighting. Our gear has a 10-year usable life. We have 62 sets that are coming up on the 10 years as of this August. So about 8 months ago, Captain Bartz, we put together a committee. They reviewed several sets of gear with 4 manufacturers. They came down to Morning Pride, which we've had in the past. It's served us well. So we're recommending the purchase of 62 sets. We did go through the process with the purchasing specialist. The quote was attached, as well as the confirmation process. And I'm looking for your approval to purchase the gear. We also compounded with this, the $314,000. We do have we're applying for a grant tomorrow to cover 101,500 of that, which is state funded. So that'll bring that 314 down, but we have not been awarded the grant. We're going to apply for it tomorrow, and we'll be working with Stacy on that paperwork also.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Any questions or discussion? Go ahead.
How long do these turnout gear last? What can we expect in time?
10 years.
10 years, and that's
Yeah,
it?
Michigan MIOSHA Part 74 and NFPA 1971 has a 10-year lifespan on structural firefighting gear.
So do they get totally discarded, or could
Yes.
nobody else could use them?
Because of
That's the law.
because of the life, correct.
Okay.
Just similar to our air packs, we
Same
turned them in
stuff.
to our or the representative we bought them from, and they're out of service.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
One notation, if I may, Deputy Chief, this is an item that was budgeted in the capital plan for this existing budget.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Hearing none. Motion by Treasurer Gillette, supported by Trustee Lucido, to approve the purchase of 62 sets of structural firefighting turnout gear from Municipal Emergency Services in the amount of $314,774. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our last item of the night is a request to approve the purchase of network switches from CDWG, in the amount of $36,657.26. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve?
Support.
Mr. Lepari.
Good evening, board members. The IT department is requesting authorization to purchase 9 network switches from CDWG at a cost of $36,657.26. These will replace old switches at all 4 fire stations, DPW, the rec center, and the senior center. Most of these old switches are over 10 years old and considered end of life by the manufacturer. The new switches will be purchased with mandatory licensing and a 1-year service agreement, which provides support and next business day advanced replacement for any hardware failures. The township is part of the MIDL purchasing program and utilizes a cooperative contract with CDWG. This is a budgeted expense. I can answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lepari. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none. Motion by Clerk Posey, supported by Trustee Oliver, to approve the purchase of network switches from CDWG in the amount of $36,657.26. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
This takes us to our second public comment of the evening. This is for non-agenda items. If you wish to make public comment, please use the microphone on the right-hand side of the room, and remember there is a 3-minute time limit.
John Parkinson again. As many of you know, I'm running for trustee in the township. I'll be the voice for the people, so make sure that you guys get out and vote. I want to read a quote by C.S. Lewis. The greatest evils in the world will not be carried out by men with guns, but by men in suits sitting behind desks. So my question wasn't answered. I still don't know what the amended item was that you guys voted to amend. I guess I'll read it in the new draft or the final noise ordinance. You all pretty much claim this wasn't about religious organizations, yet you sure did defend it as if it was one, if as it were. You guys hammered that home, but it wasn't about the religious organization. We weren't really talking about the actual religious organization. We're talking about the land use in specific. Mr. Lucido, when you said the video in question was aired. The video in question, you said you weren't using that, but it was aired. It was an aired video. It was proposed, yet it wasn't formally proposed to the township. Y'all know that that's what they want to do with the property. Let's not be naive and dumb. Just stop playing games, okay? The land is zoned single-family dwelling units according to our master plan. Now, we talked about this before. The master plan, you guys love to tout up there. You guys and the zoning board, we stand on the master plan. They rezoned the property behind my house that was zoned 3 ways to C2, which now allows a gas station and whatever else to be built behind my home. Okay? Now, I was told by a zoning committee member that it fit the master plan. If and when this comes up, I'm expecting this property, the whole village in question, we're not questioning whether or not there should be a mosque or homes, okay? Because they have a right to build homes. They don't have the right to be exclusive. They do have a right to build homes. It's single-family dwelling units, but they cannot discriminate. We know that, right? Fair Housing Act doesn't allow them to discriminate, okay? It's not about that. You know, it's about listening to the constituents you serve. It's about single-family dwelling units. That land does not have to be rezoned, should not be rezoned, because it's surrounded by other properties, other families that live in this area, and they need to be heard too. Too many people don't want to speak out about this or about the situation in fear of retaliation. But I will be their voice, because I don't fear any of you, and I don't fear any of them. And may God have mercy on our souls.
Thank you. Anyone else? No one else wishes to speak? We will go to board comments. Trustee Lucido.
Yes, I just want to address Mr. Parkinson as he mentioned to me that this wasn't about religion. It wasn't about religion. Everybody here was talking about call to prayer. Everybody here was talking about spoken word and speakers. So that is why we brought it to the portion of religion, because everybody here was discussing call to prayer. So it is not about religion. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lucido. Trustee Nevers.
Yes, I would just like to, again, congratulate the Lieutenant, last name
Stevens.
Yes, Lieutenant Stevens, for all the years of service. And it's a tough job, and she did it well, and so congratulations. That's all I have.
Thank you, Trustee Nevers. Trustee Oliver.
Same thing. Melissa Stevens, you took off, but it's quite an achievement, 25 years, starting in Macomb, finishing in Macomb, so congrats to her. Josh, I want to thank you and your department for all the work you put on in that noise ordinance, along with Mr. Aloya and the other departments that helped, so thank you for that. I think that's it.
Thank you, Trustee Oliver. Trustee Kuzmano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to the question that was asked of me 2 meetings ago, when I indicated that I wanted to be able to compare other statutes and ordinances, I just want the residents to know I reviewed Shelby Township's noise ordinance, Clinton Township's noise ordinance, and Sterling Heights noise ordinance, including our own noise ordinance and also the disturbing the peace state statute. I just want to indicate that I would be very leery about putting the full faith and trust of someone who says that they're going to take an oath to uphold the law and the Constitution of the state of Michigan and the U.S. Constitution, but then would, out of the other side of their mouth, say that they would be willing to violate those laws, either directly or indirectly, for purposes of getting elected. I take my role very seriously here, and I believe everyone else on this board is acting in good faith and that there is no conspiracy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Trustee Kuzma. Treasurer Gillette.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to, just again recognize Lieutenant Melissa Stevens and the work that she's done to keep our residents safe and make sure that Macomb Township remains one of the safest communities in Southeast Michigan, which is something we're very proud of and always are working to improve. She's been a big part of that success we've had in keeping Macomb Township as safe as we can. And beyond that, again, I'd like to thank the staff, Josh, Mr. Loya, everybody who was involved in a long and difficult process of really trying to create an ordinance that works for everybody, that's as fair as possible, that's as objective as possible, that's as legal and constitutional as possible, and that we think will improve the situation for the residents of Macomb Township. So I know it was a lot of work, a lot of meetings, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer Gillette. Clerk Posey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to say to Lieutenant Stevens that I truly enjoyed working with her side by side. We have amped up security on election day, during early voting, absentee counting boards, and at our polling locations throughout the township, and she has been a pleasure to work with. She's extremely professional and detailed, and it has created a sense of security for all of us while we're administering the elections. Someone will have some big shoes to fill from her. On to elections. The next election is the primary election, which is August 6th in Macomb Township. We are going to be mailing out the applications to vote by mail at the end of this month. We anticipate getting them in the mail at the end of this month. And if you are on our permanent bail list, which means you have requested to have a ballot immediately mailed to you without filling out an application, those ballots will be in the mail by the end, in the last week of June. So we are getting ready for the state primary election, and look in your mailboxes for some information we'll be sending your way. That's all I have.
Thank you, Clerk Posey. And like everybody else, congratulations, Lieutenant Stevens. She was an integral part of the team in Macomb Township and did an amazing job. Looking forward to finding out who her replacement's going to be. Scott, do we have any idea yet? No? No, tomorrow? Okay. We will get to announce that. Thank you to the team on the noise ordinance. Mr. Tomlinson's not here, but he was part of it too. Mr. Loy, Mr. Box, Mr. Van Tifflin weighed in. The entire Carlisle Wortman team, they put in an enormous amount of research. So thank you to everybody. I agree with everything that was said by my colleagues here today, and I appreciate all of their own diligence and hard work. And lastly, the Macomb Township offices will be closed on Monday, May 27th in observance of Memorial Day. Normal business hours will resume the next day, Tuesday, May 28th. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Support.
Any questions? Hearing none, motion by Clerk Posey, supported by Treasurer Gillette to adjourn the meeting. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned.